Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 234, and today's date is December 9th, 2013. And the title of this episode is The Push for War with China is Now Escalating. And if we look around the world, we can see how this is being played out. Right now, the United States has the European missile shield, which was supposedly being built because of Iran. But now the United States is in peace talks with Iran, and Russia wants to know the reason why they still need the European missile shield. And of course, the United States came back and said, well, we're going to continue building it, and we're going to bring in more materials and advanced missile systems, and we're not going to stop this. And this missile shield runs from Poland all the way down to Romania, across Europe, and this is supposed to protect all these nations from Iran's nuclear program. And we understand that Russia now is supplying military assets to Armenia and modernizing their bases there. They're also moving into the Arctic because there's natural resources, oil, and they're also setting up their military assets in this region. The United States is doing the same exact thing. The United States is moving military assets around and encircling China, which is the pivot to Asia. They've also sent a stealth destroyer over there and other military assets to this region. Japan right now has built the largest warship since World War II. They're trying to change their constitution so they're able to attack and no longer be a pacifist nation. They have also set up secrecy laws, so no one can do what Snowden did and blow the whistle on the secrets of the Japanese government. Plus, they don't want the everyday Japanese person and the media poking their nose into where it doesn't belong, and if you do, you are fined and put in jail. And this is what's happening all around the world. In other places, they are implementing protest laws. If people decide to protest, they could be arrested. We do have them here in the United States. And that law is if there is a government official anywhere around there, you're not allowed to protest. And there's very strict laws within Washington, D.C. About protesting. But then again, the Constitution, Bill of Rights kind of overrides all of these laws. But the powers believe that if they create these laws, about 80% of the people will follow them and not protest and do things. What they're worried about is the 20% that do not follow these laws. So right now, the central bankers, the United States government, their biggest threat is China. Why China? Because China is going to be the next reserve currency of the world. At least they're making a run for it. They're making deals all across the globe with Australia, with England, with Africa, Iran, Syria, Brazil, India. They're doing it everywhere. And they are propping their yuan up with gold. They're continually purchasing gold, and they haven't stopped. Actually, they're increasing the amount of gold that they have purchased. And right now, as we know, the Chinese already said they do not see it beneficial for them to take on the dollar anymore or to even buy treasuries. So they're rejecting treasuries right now. And Russia has said the same thing. So we can see what is happening right now. And the United States government, the central bankers, are going to do whatever they can to provoke China into doing something. And again, their original plan was to get into Iran and Syria because they need to get into countries to prop up the entire system, because without more debt, the system collapses. And for those people who don't know, the system, it was created in a way where they loaned out the first dollar to the government, and that dollar had interest attached to it. But again, where do you get the money to pay the interest? So the first dollar was introduced, and now the government owes $1.10. And where does the government get the extra 10 cents? Well, it doesn't exist. So they go back to the Federal Reserve and they say, okay, we need to borrow money to make up that 10 cents interest. Now they borrow more money, and what happens? Now they have more money with more interest. And this goes on and on and on, and this money could never ever be paid back. It is impossible. And over time, the debt reaches a place where it's unsustainable, and this is what's happening in Greece and Cyprus and Portugal and Italy and Spain, and especially in the U.S. Because what's happening here is that the U.S. has a printing press. Well, it's not a real printing press. They just push a button, and it's a bunch of zeros and ones. It is all digital today, but it is pretty much the same thing. They'll just keep creating money, creating money, creating money, and we are not seeing in we are seeing inflation, but not as high as everyone suspected, because what they're doing is they're pumping this money into the banks to buy the toxic real estate, and their instructions for the banks is to push this money into the stock market, not into the economy as a whole. The other portion of the money is to take up the slack of those countries that are no longer accepting the treasury bonds or selling the treasury bonds, because for the government to borrow this money, they need to issue, a huge amount of treasury bonds, and you need people to buy the treasury bonds. And China right now is not doing it. Russia's not doing it. They're actually selling theirs, and a lot of other foreign nations are starting to move away from the treasury bonds. And this is why the Federal Reserve is actually creating this money. It is not to help the economy. It is not to help the everyday person. It is to push off the collapse that is coming. And I know they're talking about taper. I know they want to taper. And this taper talk that they're talking about is being used to set up an event where they'll be able to blame another country for the collapse. And I'm going to call this the first collapse, part one of the collapse. And this is where we're going to see the market come down. This is where we're going to see many companies lay off. Just like we saw in 2008, we're going to see real estate decline. And what is going to happen, and we're also going to see cyber attacks, what's going to happen is the Fed is then, and the U.S. government is going to step in, and they're going to say that because of this, we cannot taper at this time. We need to increase quantitative easing, because when this happens, there'll be a lot more foreclosures. There'll be a lot more governments, other countries out there selling the treasury bonds, and the Fed needs to pick up and take up the slack of all these countries selling the treasury bonds. So they're going to have to purchase it more. And they also told us that they'd like to increase QE by 50%. In the same breath, they're talking about taper, and we know they cannot taper, because once they mention the word taper, they've tried this many times, and the entire market just starts to decline. And if they actually did taper, the entire market would just implode on itself, because right now the Fed is the entire market. All the numbers are manipulated, the unemployment's manipulated, GDP's manipulated, and I discussed this many, many times in the reports, but all of this is an illusion that the Fed is continually keeping up right now to make everyone believe that everything is fine. And I go back to common sense. If everything is fine, why does Europe have double-digit unemployment? Why is the youth unemployment skyrocketing in many of the countries? France has told us, the president has told us many times that they're coming out of the recession, and then you learn that their unemployment is accelerating and moving higher. They are in debt. You see Spain saying that they're coming out of the recession, and then you realize that they're tapping into the Social Security Reserve Fund, and you see Greece, where the IMF and the central bankers IMF told us that everything is fine after the first bailout, and they needed the second bailout, and here we are at the third bailout, and things are just getting a lot worse there. So nothing is going well. There's still capital controls in Cyprus. Nothing has really changed in that area, and they still haven't, remove them, and we'll see what happens in 2014, because they mentioned they would, but we'll see what happens. But let's get into the economic collapse news at this time. And again, if we look past the illusion and what everyone is, what all the central bankers want us to believe, right now, nearly 25% of Europeans face poverty. A quarter of the European population were at risk at poverty or social exclusion. The numbers include those deemed to fall within at least one of the following three conditions: a risk of income poverty, severely materially deprived, or living in households with very low work intensity. The highest shares of individuals being at risk of poverty or social exclusion were recorded in Bulgaria, Romania, Latvia, and Greece. The countries with the lowest rates were the Netherlands, Czech Republic, and Finland. And we're looking here, the population impact. Italy scored the highest rate with 8.2 million Italians fitting within the criteria. So, if we look across the entire Eurozone region, it doesn't look good. They are in a recession slash depression. There's no other way at looking at this. And you can see by the government's reactions to what is happening. What they do, since they cannot generate the revenue to pay for the debt, because again, they need to keep borrowing, and as they keep borrowing, the interest payments on this debt continually rise. They have to implement austerity, so they lay off people, they cut programs, and they just don't have the revenue coming in. And we see this in almost every single European country. And we also see this in the U.S., and this is why the U.S. government needs to borrow money from the Fed, and the Fed, of course, is creating the money out of thin air, because if they had enough in tax revenue to cover everything, they wouldn't have to borrow. But if you notice, the borrowing increased from 2008 to right now around, what is it, $9 trillion? And you can see what's happening right now. The revenue is declining because unemployment, the real unemployment, if you go back to 1994, prior to when they manipulated the calculation, the unemployment rate is now between 24 and 26%. Some people say it's 30%. It all depends on how you calculate it. And they're saying underemployment is reaching new highs. This is where people had full-time jobs, and now they only can find part-time jobs. And it kind of all makes sense when you look at it from a common sense approach. They're telling us that retail sales are going to be down. Now, does it make sense that the unemployment rate this year has dropped to 7%? Things are getting better, right? The stock market is reaching all-time new highs. Unemployment, 7%. Looks fantastic. Well, if we go back 1 year, unemployment was what? 7.8, 7.9%? Why was retail better then than it is now? It makes no sense. Right now, more people are working. Why are mortgage applications plunging? Why are real estate sales declining? Why do we see cancellations from new home builders? Why are Wells Fargo, Citibank, Bank of America, Chase, why are they all laying off thousands upon thousands of people in their mortgage departments if things are getting better? Because if more people are working and more people have jobs, that means more people are spending in retail, that means more people are buying homes, and that means you expand your mortgage departments. That means you open new stores in retail. That means you'll have a better year in retail, but we are not seeing this whatsoever. And what governments usually do when they cannot maintain or sustain this debt, they implement taxes. We see it in Obamacare, we see it on the online sales tax, and now there's another bill being introduced which will be a gas tax, and it will be a federal gas tax which will be 15 cents per gallon. And this is being introduced because there is a shortfall in the transportation funding next year. Well, of course there is. There is no money left. So what do? They go after the people for the money. And guess what? The people of the United States, except for the 1%, are completely tapped out. The middle class, the lower middle class, the poor, do not have any more money to give in taxes. They're just done at this point. Now, in real estate, again, this goes back to the same thing. We are seeing, you know, most of the sales in cash. About 60% of the houses are being purchased in cash. And the reason for this is a lot of hedge funds and investment companies were given money by the Fed to go out and purchase homes to pump up the markets. And they did their job. They pumped them up. Obama was out there telling us how the housing market was on a rebound and everything is working out fine. And we can see that all this is Biden is out there now with other Democrat leaders campaigning around the United States, letting everyone know that the United States is in a recovery. And again, if you have the campaign to let people know that the economy is recovering, that tells you that the economy is not recovering. It's almost like Obamacare. Obama is campaigning to let you know how great Obamacare is. If it was great, there is no need to campaign. People will know it, they will go for it, and they will take it. That's how it works. I'll give you an example. When the iPhone came out, they didn't have to do much of a campaign. Why? Because people used it, they liked it, they found out how great it is, it's easy to use, and they just purchased it. That's why sales increased, and that's why people liked it. Same thing goes with like movies. If it's a great movie, they don't advertise it as much. They don't have to. It gets around by word of mouth because people let you know that it's a great movie. Now, I got a little sidetracked there. Now, luxury home foreclosures are now soaring. They're up 61% versus last year, and foreclosures for homes worth $5 million or more are up 61%. And recently, agents have been saying they're starting to see the high-end properties go into foreclosure. And again, there is a shadow inventory on the banks. This is why the Federal Reserve is purchasing this toxic real estate. The banks do not want to release these foreclosures because if they do, the inventories will skyrocket and the prices of homes will come down. And this is why they're not releasing them. Even if you're in a foreclosed home, I know a couple people who are, they haven't made payments within a year, year and a half. Guess what? They are still living there without making a payment. The bank has never come and foreclosed on their homes. They just don't want to do it. They don't want to put it on their books. Now, we talked about the holiday season, and the holiday season, most of the retailers are telling us that it's not going to be a great holiday season. I don't understand. Unemployment is down. It's been coming down. It should be a fantastic holiday season. But reality is reality, and income declines, and it's expected to dampen holiday spending. The data suggests we're in a holding pattern on spending because people just do not have the disposable income right now. Because if you went from a full-time to a part-time job, you just don't have the money and the funds like you had before. And this goes on to say over 3/4 or 77% of respondents still do not believe the economy has yet begun to improve. Why? Because it hasn't. And this is great. The report suggests that people might have less money in their pockets to spend this year. You think? Well, I'm going to tell you, they do. They have less money this year because these numbers, this economy is a complete illusion. And here are a couple of reasons why the economic recovery is a giant lie. The only reason that the official unemployment rate has been declining over the past couple of years is that the federal government has been pretending that millions upon millions of unemployed Americans no longer want a job and have left the labor force. And we know what happens. They changed the calculation. Those people who fall off the unemployment are not counted anymore, and this is how they are manipulating the numbers. Only about 47% of all adults in America have a full-time job at this point. 1 out of every 10 jobs is now filled by a temp agency. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, median household income in the United States has fallen for 5 years in a row. Now, this makes sense because as people are being laid off from their full-time work and they're going into part-time work, that's the underemployment, their income goes down. And we can see why the income has been falling for all of these years. And the rate of home ownership in the United States has fallen for 8 years in a row. Again, it completely makes sense. It makes more sense than what the government and the Fed is telling us, that housing is rebounding, people are buying like crazy, and the market's good. No. Back in 2007, 2008, the amount of people that lost their home for short sales or foreclosures or just had to sell their house and couldn't get back into another house because they lost their job, that is a lot of homes on the market. And we have to remember, each one of these people have bad credit and cannot purchase another home. They don't have the income, they don't have the credit at this time. Total consumer credit has risen by a whopping 22% over the past 3 years. Well, if you don't have the money and you don't have the same money coming in, people always resort to credit cards. Also, what the government is doing is they're trying to spur the real estate market like they've been doing, and they're giving 100% financing to pretty much anyone that has a pulse. They're also doing the same thing in the automobile market. They are giving loans to people to purchase cars in the subprime arena. So you can walk in, have totally wiped out bad credit, and get an automobile. When Barack Obama first entered the White House, there were about 32 million Americans on food stamps. Today, there are more than 47 million Americans on food stamps. The U.S. national debt is on pace to more than double during the 8 years of the Obama administration. In other words, under Barack Obama, the U.S. government will accumulate more debt than it did under all the presidents in U.S. history combined. And that's a lot of debt. Now, the Fed is out there letting us know that the economy is doing well, it is recovering, we are on the right track. And improvements in the U.S. job market make reductions to the Federal Reserve's massive bond buying program more likely. And Fed President James Bullard said that the probability of easing back the pace of asset purchases has increased, and one possible reaction to a recent run of upbeat data was a small taper at the upcoming meeting of the Fed. And we can see that they are pushing the taper just like they did in September. They're pushing it through August into September. And what do we have there? We have the Syrian event. They thought this event was going forward. They thought they were going to show that the collapse was being done by Syria, and this is how they were going to formulate just about to taper, but they couldn't taper because we were hit by a cyber attack, by a chemical weapon, or whatnot. Here we are again. The president is making a deal with Iran, going through the peace negotiations. He just reported that these peace negotiations have a 50-50 chance of actually going through. And a lot of the other congressmen are right now making up legislation to impose new sanctions. And we know what the president said. If new sanctions are put into place, this could start a war. And we can see where this is going because they are setting this up for the next event. Okay, now Obamacare. Here's another problem with Obamacare. I mean, there's many, many problems. A new report by the Financial Times reveals major hospitals, including 2 world-renowned cancer centers, are excluded from insurance plans being offered over Obamacare's troubled online exchanges. It will not offer patients access to Memorial Sloan Kettering in Manhattan, MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, or Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. Why? Because, again, the government does not care about the people's health. They don't care about giving you health insurance. All they want to do is to take as much money as they possibly can from you to monetize the debt. They need the tax revenue. They need the money. The insurance companies need the money. Everybody needs the money. So the only place to go for it is the people. And this health insurance right now is not for the people, because you do not have to put a penalty on something that is great and for the people. There is no reason for it. The only reason for it is to generate revenue for the government. Now, I've said this in many reports, and it's still a goal of the government. They want to disarm the American people, and they want to confiscate the weapons. And we have to remember the U.S. Senate has the UN Arms Treaty and the Dianne Feinstein gun bill pending in the Senate right now. We understand that John Kerry has signed the UN Arms Treaty. We understand that the President has already created the executive orders to support Dianne Feinstein's gun bill and the UN Arms Treaty, and he said he will sign this. And what they are trying to do right now, and eventually what will happen, is they will push an event forward to get the Senate to vote and pass these laws. And right now, Bloomberg and Obama are out there, and on Monday, Obama's current operation sent an email to supporters urging them to hold events advocating gun control on December 14th, the one-year anniversary of the murders of Sandy Hook Elementary School. And right now, they are losing ground. CNN polls show that support for gun control has dropped by 6 points since January, and a majority of Americans now oppose the stricter gun laws. And what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to push this agenda forward. And the only way to do this, and the only way to make Americans believe that they need to have their guns confiscated, is to show and have a bloody, horrific event. And if you look back over the past couple of months, we've had many different gun false flag events, and what this is doing is this is building up to the next event, and the next one, or the one after, depending on how this goes about, will be one of the worst ones, and they will definitely make a point to be on the air. Obama will be on the air, just like he did with Sandy Hook, to be out there pushing for gun control as soon as the event hits. Now, we understand that the NSA, DHS, and FBI, or CIA are all spying on American people. And the reason for this is because they fear the American people, especially those who are armed. And right now, the NSA have their spying hooks into games like Worldcraft, Second Life, and many other games, and they are spying on people who are playing these games. And the NSA document from 2008 titled "Exploiting Terrorist Use of Games and Virtual Environments." They are looking for terrorists who are playing these games. They're looking for terrorists who are trying to recruit people who are playing these games. And to me, I mean, it makes no sense, because when was the last time they actually had someone recruited from playing a video game? It just seems a little insane. It seems more so that the NSA wants to be in every single aspect of what we do, in our TVs, in our iPhones, in our smartphones, in our emails, in our cars. They want to be everywhere listening to make sure you are doing what they want. And if you are not, you go on the list. They make a social profile. Who are you connected to? And this is what they are using this for, because they are going to monitor you before the collapse, which is right now, during the collapse, and after the collapse, because they need to know what is going on, because they fear the American people. Now, out in the Ukraine, they are protesting, and they brought down the monument of Lenin, and it reminds me of when the United States went into Iraq, and the statue was torn down, and that was a staged hoax, and there was only a few amount of people there. That was all orchestrated by the CIA to make people believe that this is what the Iraqi people really wanted. But we have to remember there were no weapons of mass destruction. The only reason the United States central bankers went into Iraq is to place the entire country back on the US dollar as the reserve currency. And that is it, because they were selling their oil, not using the US dollar. Syria is selling their oil, not using the US dollar. Iran is selling their oil, not using the US dollar. So the Ukraine decided to not go with EU because they looked at it and they said, wow, most of the European nations are in debt. They have double-digit unemployment. They're in a recession/depression. We looked at Iceland. They got rid of the EU. They got rid of the bankers. They arrested them, and their country's doing better. Russia's doing well, so we better go with Russia. And all of a sudden, protests, started, and everyone was against this, and they wanted to go with the EU. And to me, this looks like a complete staged riot going on in the Ukraine, and this is done to the central bankers do this to many countries, because you have to remember, those countries who do not have a private Western central bank, they are the enemy, and they will do anything and everything to get them to use the private Western central bank currency, either be the EU or, the euro or the US dollar. Makes no difference. Now, Russia, like I said in the beginning of this report, is reactivating their military airfield in the Arctic region after 20 years. And they are putting military assets in place because they understand the U.S. is going there. Canada is also laying claim to the North Pole amid Arctic resource rush. So they're also making their move up in the Arctic, because the Arctic does have natural resources, which is oil, and it is a strategic location to put military assets. Now, the American people disapprove of the nuclear deal with Iran. The American people are highly skeptical of the interim nuclear pact negotiated with Iran last month. The poll shows the majority of the country believes the Iranian leaders are not serious about addressing concerns about their country's nuclear program. And this is playing right into what the Obama administration, the central bankers, really want. Because you have to think back to the Syrian event. What happened there is that they kept on talking about this red line. If the red line's crossed with chemical weapons, we're going to strike them. Well, the red line was crossed, not once, not twice, but I think 3 times. And the Obama administration finally said, okay, that's it, we had enough. And the American people said, we don't care, we're not going to war. Congress said, we're not voting on it, we're not going to war. So there was no backing for this event whatsoever. So what they're doing now is they are playing the illusion that they want peace with Iran, and the American people are saying we don't trust Iran because of all the propaganda that has been out there, that Iran is creating a nuclear weapon, that they have a ballistic missile that they're testing, and they're going to be putting a nuclear warhead on top of it. They've been saying this for over 30 years. Israel's been out there saying that they're 3 to 5 months away from a nuclear weapon. Just recently they said they have enough material to make a dirty bomb. Right now, if they wait another month or so, they'll have enough to make a good-sized nuke to nuke the U.S. And this is all playing into the false flag event, because now they have the people skeptical. The polls show where they need to go with this. The polls showed before with Syria that they didn't want war. I think 9% wanted war, and 81% did not want war at the time. So now they see the poll numbers where if something should happen, the American people would say, see, we didn't trust them. Oh my God, there was a dirty bomb attack here in the U.S. We need to go get the Iranians. And we can see how this is playing out right now. And the the Saudis with the rest of the Middle Eastern states there, um, they've are all getting together and making their own Gulf alliance, and they're making their own self-defense. The U.S. Pentagon Chief Chuck Hagel visited Saudi Arabia on Monday. He's assured the Gulf states that the agreement struck between major powers and Iran on November 24th will not affect the presence of some 35,000 U.S. troops in the region. And right now, Saudi Arabia is calling on all Gulf monarchies to unite for their own self-defense at this time. And again, we have to remember that Egypt, Saudi Arabia have been in talks and have made deals with China and Russia. Russia with military assets and China with trading with the yuan and getting funding and loans. Now, we understand that France is making their move into Central Africa, and we have to remember that China is pouring in billions of dollars of U.S. dollars into Africa to build up their infrastructure. So now, of course, the Western central bankers need to go into Africa because they have, lithium, gold, oil, tons of natural resources in Africa. So France has gone down into Central Africa, and now Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel has ordered the U.S. military to transport troops to Central African Republic as part of an international effort to quell sectarian violence in that country. And again, we know why they're going down there is to lend support to France to help capture the natural resources and to completely guard against anyone else coming into the region, because this is what the central bankers do. They go after the natural resources of the countries and they make sure they are able to trade the paper for the real assets. Now, South Korea just unveiled its own air defense zone, and it overlaps part of China and Japan. But South Korea and Japan, that is fine. China, it is not. And it seems like this was a move to provoke China in a way, and we'll have to see what happens, because this is their game right now. Their game is to try to provoke China into doing something. They're sailing U.S. vessels. They're flying B-52 bombers in the region. And right now, the Japanese press saying that the China-Japan war could break out in January. And what they're saying over there is that the economic situation in China is pretty rough right now, and from the start of the next year, it's expected to worsen in China. An unnamed diplomatic source offered the prediction that Chinese might very well set off an incident accidentally on purpose, and the unnamed diplomatic source, I worry about the possibility they might force down a civilian airliner and hold the passengers hostage. And we can see how this false flag could come about. A civilian airliner flying in this air defense zone, someone shooting a missile, or they have agent provocateurs on the plane saying that they have hostages, and we can see how this entire event could lead to war. And this is what the Japanese newspaper is saying out in Japan. Now, there have been many cyber attacks, and thousands of passwords have been stolen from social media sites like Google, Twitter, Facebook, and Yahoo. It's about 2 million passwords. And it doesn't appear that the servers were hacked. What has happened, though, is that a malware botnet Trojan was laying dormant, and it was able to record the keystrokes of all these people and understand and put it all together to formulate what their passwords were. And we've talked about dormant malware sitting on either servers or people's PCs. We have to remember that there is the NeverQuest malware, which allows it to sit on a financial institution's server or PC and can be called upon at any time. And it has the ability to steal passwords. It has the ability to siphon off money or destroy data in the financial institution. So we can see where this is going, and we understand that eventually the event that is going to take place is going to be a cyber attack, chemical weapon, and dirty bomb type of attack. It's going to be a multi-prong, because we have to remember where we are headed. I mean, look what they did just to get into Iraq and Afghanistan. They brought down the World Trade Center. They also needed it to cover up the $6 trillion that were missing. So they had a plane fly into the Pentagon and had, I think it was World Trade Center 7 fall down, where all the information was. Look what they did just to cover that up and to bring us into war into the Middle East, and to enact the NDAA, the Patriot Act, and make everyone scared of terrorists and give up our rights. What do you think they're going to do to cover up a collapse? Do you think they're just going to sit there and just have a small little explosion go off? No, they're going to bring it to the next level. They're going to show you what terrorists are capable of. They're going to show you countries do not like the U.S. because of our freedoms, which is a bunch of BS. And they're going to make everyone afraid, and they're going to have the American people beg the U.S. government to strike these countries and go after them. This is what they're planning on. Now, lawmakers are saying that Obama's statements about Al-Qaeda on the run, that we've decimated them, that they're no longer a viable terrorist threat, is completely and utterly a bunch of baloney. This is what they're saying. And Obama now has been saying that the core of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan is on the path to defeat. The U.S. is indeed facing an emergence of various Al-Qaeda affiliates. So now he's kind of backpedaling, saying, yes, in Afghanistan and Pakistan we're defeating them, but they're breaking off into different types of affiliate terrorists that are hard to track, and they're lone wolf groups. And we can see how this is playing out, because we have to remember Dianne Feinstein and Mike Rogers and other congressmen were out there saying that Al-Qaeda is a bigger threat right now. They're worried about people coming back to this country being radicalized. They're worried about the people coming over the border from Canada, because these could be Al-Qaeda terrorists, and most of them are bomb makers. And it just so happened the DHS kind of lost track of all these people. We also understand that they need to keep the propaganda up and keep this information flowing so people have it in the back of their minds when the event occurs. And what we are hearing right now, that Iran is using diplomatic pouches to smuggle weapons into and out of the country. The Iranians are taking advantage of diplomatic mail in order to transfer these type of items. They are taking advantage of the drug smuggling routes from South America into the United States in order to move weapons there. And they are building a terror infrastructure in South America using these bases that they have built in places like Cuba, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to act against the United States. And we can see how they're continually pushing this forward and making people believe that a terrorist act is coming soon. Now, we understand that China is importing gold, and they have imported a lot of gold over the years, tons and tons of gold, because they're using this to back up the yuan. And something very interesting happened. All of a sudden, in Singapore, there have been riots that just started to break out. And there hasn't been riots there since 1969. And just yesterday, a 33-year-old Indian man got hit by a bus in Singapore, in Little India, and this was the catalyst that made people go into a full-blown riot in Singapore. And we have to remember something that I told everyone, maybe it was 2 or 3 reports back, I think it was episode 230, that China and Singapore made an agreement with each other. They made a deal, something that would prop up the Chinese yuan. The Singapore exchange and the Hong Kong exchange combined their forces in rolling out a more financial denominated Chinese yuan. And I mentioned this back, it had to be at least 4 or 5 days ago. And it's very interesting that they made this deal. And what this deal does is it says that that the dollar is in a period of a terminal decline, and it's clear that the Chinese yuan is going to take a tremendous market share away from the dollar. And this is a big piece of the puzzle to take away the power of the dollar. And the central, again, I say this again, if you are not a Western central bank and you do not use the US dollar as a reserve currency, you are an enemy to the central bankers. And you can see a theme right now. In every place where the country did not go with the Western central bankers, what has happened? The Ukraine riots. Singapore now riots. During the time in Africa, in Kenya, when there was that mall false flag event, the terrorist attack, during that period, Kenya was making a deal with China to become the clearinghouse of the yuan for Africa. Take a look around, because every single place the central bankers make a threat, that country is not using the US dollar as the reserve currency. Iran, Syria, North Korea, Iraq, Yemen wasn't, Lebanon, Libya. What happened to most of those countries? Their leaders were ousted, a puppet regime was put into place, and the private Western central bank was put into place, and the US dollar was made the reserve currency of that country. So we can see what is happening, and we can see how they're going to play this out. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.